Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Medidata's office hours for intelligent trials. My name is David McKee, and I'm the head of North America's marketing team here at Medidata, and I'm going to be your host for today's office hours. Now, before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available within 2 to 3 days after the event. Your audio will be on mute throughout the session. However, if you encounter any technical issues, please use the Q&A box on the left of your screen. The presentation will be followed by a Q&A session. Please submit your questions during or after the presentations using the Q&A box at the left of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Today's speakers are Farid Melmen, Senior Vice President, Acorn AI at a Medidata company, Jeff Bembanaste, Senior Director and Product Lead, Acorn AI, a Medidata company, and Josh Hartman, Vice President of Data Operations at Acorn AI, a Medidata company. You can read their full bio on the right side of your window. I'll now turn it over to Farid to get us started.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks everyone for joining today. So just a quick introduction. I'm Farid Melhem. I'm head Acorn AI Labs, which is Medidata's data science lab, where we are looking at ways to use the data from the various trials that flow through the Medidata platform to help inform better clinical trial development. So again, thank you for joining. I'm going to start by taking you through a bit of detail on the scale of the impact we're seeing from COVID-19. And then I'll turn it over to Jeff, who's going to discuss how we're working with sponsors and CROs to address some of these issues. So I'm going to get into some numbers in a second, but top line, we've seen significant impact on clinical trials from COVID-19. That is probably not a surprise to anyone on this call. So studies are having trouble enrolling. Many sponsors have made decisions to pause recruitment as well as hold starts of new studies. And then we're also seeing impact on ongoing studies with both patients and investigators struggling to maintain visit schedules, especially in more impacted regions. And so there's a large operational challenge that we're all going through as an industry right now in terms of maintaining clinical trials. And then there is also a challenge of uncertainty. Because the situation is changing so rapidly, just getting facts about what's happening on the ground and what might be coming next week, next month, in 3 months is a major challenge and something that we are trying to address. So one way that we're looking at that and trying to address some of that uncertainty is through data and analytics. And what we've launched is COVID-19 Trial Impact Analytics. And we're measuring the impact of clinical trials of COVID-19 by looking at the roughly 6,000 ongoing clinical trials that are running on our platform and measuring week to week and month to month what is the impact that we're seeing. So the table you see here shows it's a table of subject accrual, meaning subjects that are screened or randomized into a trial. So it's really a view of patient flow, new patient flow into sites. And this is across both geographies as well as a therapeutic area view. And what you're seeing here is really across the board impact. So we saw a decline across geographies starting in February in Asia Pac, and then followed on pretty quickly in March in the US and in Europe. And impact has been across the board and is still worsening overall. So the first 2 weeks in April, we saw subject accrual down 75% compared to the same period last year. And that is down even from March, where that number was more like 65% year-over-year change. So it suggests that unfortunately we haven't hit the bottom yet globally of the impact of this on patients getting into clinical trials. If there is some encouraging news, or at least some green shoots of recovery, we are seeing early signs of uptick in countries that were affected earliest. So namely China, South Korea. If you look at the green bars in the chart here, China in the first 2 weeks of April versus that same period last year was down about 40%, which is bad, but compared to closer to 70% in March, it's an improvement, and we see a similar trend in South Korea. The other thing I'll point out here is that we are seeing differences across disease areas. Oncology has been the most resilient due to patient need and the sometimes specialized nature of the clinics. But there are other areas where we are seeing pretty differential performance. And then, not surprisingly, we are also seeing some difference in phases of studies, with earlier phase studies being impacted more severely than later phase studies. Another view I'll share with you is around the impact of studies that are ongoing. And patients that are already enrolled in trials are also struggling to make their visits. So what you're looking at here is a view of visits per enrolled patient per month. So this is really a measure of total volume of visits for ongoing trials across the globe. And so both globally and in the US specifically, there's been a decrease of about 17% in visits per subject between the start of the COVID-19 pandemic and the end of March. China saw an even steeper decline with a 30% decrease between October and February. But similar to what we saw on the subject accrual side, there has been some bounce back in China with a 22% improvement over the last month. So again, we're still way down, even in places like China and Korea, but some early signs of a slight uptick. And looking across these numbers, that uptick is really raising some questions among sponsors, because they're trying to, from the data side of things, figure out a couple of pieces of information. The first is, frankly, just how can I better understand what's happening with my trials and with the industry at this moment, and use that data to adjust my trials appropriately. So how can I learn about, how can I get to a granular level of understanding at the country and at the site level around patients coming into the site, around visits being missed, around data quality? And that's the first question, is just getting the facts on the ground straight across trials so that you can plan around what's going on right now. With a very quick second follow-on question is, how can I build forward-looking plans in this environment? So what does the recovery look like? How will we know when it's coming? And, as I'm thinking about either restarting studies, ramping back up with new studies, how do I start to think about what that looks like over the next 2, 3, 4, 6 months, and frankly, beyond? So that was just a preview. That was a peer review of some of the data and analysis that we've been doing to try to size the impact of this problem. I'm going to hand it over to Jeff now, who's going to talk a bit about how we're approaching these questions. Jeff?
Thanks, Fareed. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Bambanastib again, and I lead our intelligent trials offering within Acorn AI. What I'll do here is provide you a little bit more detail around how we are getting to these insights and how we're looking to help our customers who are getting impacted by COVID-19 in terms of their clinical trials. The underlying capabilities of the analyses and analytics that Fareed started sharing with you is built on our intelligent trials offering. It really pulls together a couple of components from an operational analytics perspective. First is a look into study design, both operationally and scientifically as well, to understand disease areas, trial design, and trial complexity. Second is around study feasibility. This is around accelerating operational outcomes by selecting and optimizing the selection of country footprint and sites. We have historical benchmarks, predictive models that we use to help our customers with such decisions. And the third component is what we call our performance analytics solution area. This is really post-launch tracking the performance of trials against earlier predictions, plans, and forecasts, and really looking at how your trials are doing in a portfolio of trials against the similar trials in the industry and against changing industry conditions. Given that trials run for a long period of time, it's important to really have that monitoring in place and look at and track against changing conditions. What we are going to be talking about in a little bit more detail here, our trial impact analytics offering specifically for COVID-19 is a specialized version of the performance analytics offering that we have that is really targeted towards some of the questions specifically around this pandemic. And as Fareed mentioned earlier, these solutions are really built on the data that has been accumulating over the Medidata platform, and our customers have been running on our platform. About 20,000 clinical trials that we have to date, of which 6,000 of them are active trials. So those are the ones that we're looking to see what changes that are happening today and have the ability to compare to kind of previous trials as well for some of those year-over-year comparisons. So just a little more information about trial impact analytics offering. As Fareed was mentioning, there are two main components that we have and built up, and we've set and pulled together standardized dashboards that help our customers quickly get to this information. The first is situation tracking. What's happening to a customer's trials? That could be individual trials, that could be trials within an indication or across a whole portfolio, and monitoring some of those changes on a year-to-year basis and also on a weekly basis. The second component is the industry view that we talked about. So looking at the rest of the 6,000 ongoing trials that we have, being able to show some of the benchmarks and look at any correlations between what the customer is seeing and what's happening in the industry. Some of the key questions around this are, what are the broader trends? Is what I'm seeing in my portfolio similar to what's happening more broadly in the industry? And especially as we start seeing improvements in the broader industry, are my trials keeping up, right? Those are some of the key questions. And especially when we look at the site perspective and the region perspective for critical trials that our customers are trying to kind of accelerate and push forward right now, what are some of the regions that are being impacted less that they can shift their sites to and go to as countries? The second piece is around impact forecasting, and that's where we bring in and overlay some of the COVID-19 testing, infection rates, and other external data to provide that linkage between early kind of signals and information that are external to clinical trials and their relationship to what we then see in clinical trials, whether that's around new patients getting enrolled or patients missing their visits or not being able to make their visits because there are lockdowns and restrictions around movement. And this really helps provide a kind of view into kind of leading indicators, both of slowdown and, as Fareed was touching earlier, with some of the countries of recovery as well. Just a little bit more detail on some of the key metrics that we've started with here. New subject accrual is really around patients getting added at a study site level, whether that's kind of enrolled or randomized at that study site. And we can look at that information at multiple different views at the site level for a trial across geographies and regions, and look at change year over year as well. Data entry is the data points that are being collected in the EDC system. This is our RAVE solution, where we have information on all data points, timestamps, and this is really what we use to calculate that metric. And visits, we both look at the the general and average visit volumes across the industry and for studies. And for customers who are leveraging the Rave study target window feature, which is kind of setting up their kind of visit schedules, we can also look at missed and late visits as well. And all of these metrics, as we mentioned, we are tracking on a weekly basis. There are additional metrics that we're considering as well to expand off of this. That includes site user activities, data entry lags, query response rates, SDV rates, and such. Just a quick view in terms of some of the visuals that we have and that we've built into the dashboard. We've talked about monthly and weekly tracking of new subject accrual. The data can be cut in multiple ways, going down to therapeutic areas or even down to the indication level. Views where we get a heat map to look at the whole globe and see where there are hotspots and where there are improvements. Look at the distribution of kind of therapeutic areas and disease areas that are active or not within a country, again, to be able to help with our customers' decisions of how to mitigate risk and how to shift kind of the activities within their portfolios. From a data point collection perspective, this is something that our customers are interested in looking at a portfolio level and also at a trial level as well. So really kind of that comprehensive view, both internally looking and also the comparison against kind of external benchmarks within the industry. So with that, I think just to summarize, we've really stood up quickly a kind of customized and specialized view of our performance analytics offering, which helps our customers track what's going on with their studies and look at the industry. We're seeing a tremendous amount of interest given the impact on the industry, and we're working really hard to be able to provide insights that are relevant, that are timely, and that will help our customers kind of make as informed a decision as possible in these difficult times.
All right, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Fareed, for a great presentation today. We're now going to move on to the Q&A portion of our session, and I just want to let everyone know there's still time to submit your questions to the Q&A box at the left of the screen. We're going to try to get to as many as possible today, and if we aren't able to answer your questions, we will try to follow up after the call. So it looks like we're getting a couple of questions coming in already. The first one that we have is, what will study startup look like post-pandemic? What are some of the signs that studies will begin again?
Yep, I'll take that one. Yeah, so as we're thinking about study startup post-pandemic, we're really trying to understand when are the conditions right for a startup. And so basically, when have we seen enough recovery to start some of these studies back up again? And the way that we're doing that from an analytic perspective is by overlaying some of the data that we are getting from the external environment. So overlaying epi data in terms of COVID infection rates, as well as hospitalization death rates. And then we're also overlaying things like social data to understand people's movements, as well as government data around status of lockdown within countries. All of those are that will drive the ability to start studies back up again. And we can use some of the early responders, like China, like Korea, to start to map out what that trajectory might look like. And now, once you actually see the recovery, what does study startup look like? That's obviously an open question, but what we do expect is that it will be different indication to indication and region to region. And so sponsors and CROs will have to go through a prioritization process to determine which are the priority studies to get started first, and how do we kind of ramp this up over time.
All right. Thanks, Fareed. We're getting a few more questions coming in. Our next question is, are you looking at metrics around data quality as well?
Yeah, and maybe I can take this one. This is Josh Hartman. I'm Vice President for Data Operations with Acorn AI. I've been working across our data assets and analytic solutions for the better part of the last 18 or so years. And the answer to this question, Dave, is for sure we are looking at metrics around data quality. So Jeff, I think, mentioned a couple of those that we're investigating now in terms of aspects of query rates, where have queries to sites increased. We're also looking at data correction rates as a possibility. So when data points are being changed after entry, when there's a manual intervention required to address those things. So we really have, I think, a pretty unique view into aspects of data quality around the clinical trial, given our position with data capture. And so that's something we're going to look to build into these solutions as well.
Great, thanks, Josh. We have another question that came in. What items do you think will be detrimental to sites when the pandemic is over? What items will be beneficial?
Yeah, I think sites are struggling in the same way that everyone else is. And so I think, even when the pandemic is over, it won't be a, turn on the switch sort of an approach. It will be a slow ramp up for sites, just as it is for the rest of society. And so we'll need to think about ways to enable sites to get their patients flowing back in. And some of that might be, simple virtualization tools, making it easier to consent patients back into sites through e-consent or other methods. Some of that may be, additional support around sites, especially those that have been in areas that are more affected. I think the good news is that, from everything we've seen, patients are still making an effort to get to their sites and are still, interested and excited about being in their clinical trials. And so we don't expect there to be as much of a challenge, on the patient side as they get more comfortable with the environment. But certainly just from an operational perspective, there will be a ramp up needed. I think the other thing to consider, both from the sponsor side and from the site side, is that it is unlikely that the recovery from COVID-19 on a global level is going to be a smooth line up, right? I think we expect to see additional outbreaks of hotspots of COVID over time, potentially another spike around the, November timeframe as we get into fall. And then, just outbreaks in various regions over time. And so going forward, for the foreseeable future, you will have to think about planning studies in a more flexible way, or in a way that anticipates disruption in at least a portion of sites. And so that's another sort of challenge that sponsors and CROs are going to face.
Great, thanks, Fareed. I just want to remind everyone, if you do have questions you'd like to ask, please submit them in the Q&A box at the left-hand side of your screen. We have another question that came in. Jeff, this might be a good one for you. How are customers using the information this solution provides?
Yep, happy to take that one, Dave. Thanks. I think there are a couple of different kind of layers to this. One, our customers are trying to understand generally and at a high level what's happening in the industry, right? So these are the trends at country level, at a therapeutic area, and really get a sense for the changes that are happening kind of at that broadest level. The next step down is in customers who are interested in specific indications. There, we're able to provide information at a more regional level, at a site level as well, to really show what the impact is for the sites that they care about, whether that's because they are looking to take a study and shift where that's being run, or they have an ongoing study and they would like to compare the impact that they're seeing to kind of other studies in that indication and in similar areas as well. So we're able to provide some of the metrics, as I had mentioned earlier, down to that level of granularity. And third is where customers come to us and say, look, we have this very critical study, and we would like to do kind of a deeper dive kind of analysis, both in terms of the current situation, but also to look at kind of forecasting and options for their recovery plans. And that's where we've been able to help them at that very specific study level as well.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Well, it looks like we have another question that came in. When you say site level, what data do you have at the site level? Jeff, this might be a good one for you to take.
Sure. So we kind of talk about sites. There are two levels, right? There's the healthcare facility, the institution, and then there's also the investigator level. So we generally look at our metrics at the facility level, but also have information on which investigators were involved or are involved in clinical trials. So it really covers the healthcare facilities and the investigators.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Well, it looks like we have covered all the questions that have come in so far. And I just want to thank everyone for attending today's office hours. As a reminder, we are recording today's session, and you will receive a link of the recording within 2 to 3 days. Now, I just see one last question came in. I think we have another minute left. So before we wrap up, I'm just going to go ahead and ask this question. How is this offering really helping to make a difference? How is this different from other information customers can get?
Yeah, I can take that. It's different, and the real difference, I think, is that industry-wide view. And so, a lot of customers can look at what's happening with their own trials, although frankly, that's often a challenge as well. And if those trials happen to be running through RAVE, we can help with just the data management around that portion of it. But it's hard to really get signal from a single trial or even a few trials within an indication. And so comparing to that industry-wide view is where you can start to see some of the broader impact. And you can start to understand, is the decline I'm seeing in this trial or at this site consistent with what's happening in the country, or is there something unique about my trial that's either causing it to overperform or underperform versus the overall impact that we're seeing. And that really helps to drive some of that differential decision making, understanding what are the regions that are, say, less affected that we could go to try to spur some additional activity in a trial. Or even what are the characteristics of studies that are doing better or worse so that we can understand how that's likely to affect our portfolio going forward.
Okay, thank you, Fareed. So that is the end of the presentation today. And I wanted to remind everyone that we are recording today's office hours session. And we will send out a link to the recording within 2 to 3 days. And again, I'd like to thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're done.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Just before we wrap up, is there any feedback for us that you would like to give? Or, I mean, we can circle back with you afterwards. I just want to make sure that as we, keep doing these events, we continue to learn from what we're doing and improve upon it.
Dave, this is maybe just the first thing on my mind here, not specific feedback for you guys, but is this level, I mean, we only got one